In the dim light of a fading Victorian afternoon, the gates of Blackthorn Asylum creaked open, welcoming the lost, the broken, and the forgotten into its cold embrace. Beyond those rattan bars lay a world apart, a realm where hope came to wither, and sanity was a fragile thread, stretched thin between despair and madness. Blackthorn was no mere institution. It was a labyrinth of shadows, a theater of suffering where every corridor whispered tales of torment, and every cell bore the weight of shattered minds. At the center of this bleak universe stood Dr. Ambrose Wren, a man whose gaze was as sharp as a scalpel, yet clouded by his own obsessions. A pioneer in the nascent science of mental illness, his mind wrestled daily with mysteries no medicine could fully tame. He believed in progress, in the possibility of healing souls fractured by the cruelties of life. Yet, beneath his veneer of clinical detachment lurked a haunted man, torn between empathy and the cold logic that demanded sacrifice for the greater good. The asylum was home to over 100 souls, each a story written in anguish. Among them was Eleanor Finch, a young woman whose laughter once filled the gardens, but was now reduced to hollow murmurs behind iron bars. She had been brought here after a breakdown that none could explain, a silent scream against a world that refused to listen. Eleanor's eyes, wide and haunted, flickered with fragments of memories, of freedom lost and nights swallowed by shadows. The asylum's walls were closing in on her, inch by inch, whispering madness into her mind. Dr. Wren's methods were a cruel dance between hope and horror. He experimented with treatments that blurred the line between care and cruelty. The straitjacket, the cold bath, and the dreaded spinning chair that left patients dizzy and disoriented, their minds fraying at the edges. Each device was a tool forged in the fires of desperation, wielded by those who believed the madness could be tamed by force and fear. Yet, the cost was steep: sanity sacrificed on the altar of progress, humanity stripped away piece by piece. The staff, a mixture of weary nurses and brutal attendants, moved through the halls like ghosts, some driven by compassion, others hardened into merciless keepers of order. Among them was Thomas Gray, a man whose hands bore the marks of years spent in endless toil. He was neither villain nor hero, but a man trapped in a system that demanded obedience above all else. His eyes reflected the conflict within, the desire to ease suffering, crushed beneath the weight of duty and fear. Outside, the world marched forward, oblivious to the horrors within Blackthorn's walls. Industrial progress roared like a beast, steam engines and factories reshaping the landscape, while the asylum remained a forgotten pocket of despair. Letters from families ceased, visits grew sparse, and rumors whispered that the patients were lost causes, better left to rot in their cages. The stigma of madness cloaked the asylum in silence, a dark secret buried beneath Victorian propriety. But Blackthorn held deeper shadows, secrets etched in the faces of its inmates, in the desperate scribbles on yellowed walls, and in the silent screams that echoed through the night. Whispers spoke of vanished patients, their disappearances masked as transfers or relocations, tales of forbidden experiments, where the fragile mind was pushed beyond limits, left bodies broken and spirits shattered. These stories were passed in hushed tones, glimpsed only through cracked windows, and whispered in the dead of night. Eleanor's days blurred into a nightmarish cycle of confinement and confusion. She clung to fading memories, a desperate attempt to anchor herself amid the chaos. Her mind, once sharp and bright, began to unravel, threads of reality slipping through her fingers like sand. The asylum's darkness seeped into her soul, twisting hope into despair, sanity into madness. She was not alone. Many around her danced on the edge of oblivion, their screams silenced only by the cold walls that held them captive. As Dr. Wren paced his study, poring over notes stained with ink and tears, he wrestled with his own demons. His belief in science was tempered by doubt, his quest for cures haunted by the faces of those he could not save. The asylum was both his life's work and his prisoner place, where progress and cruelty intertwined, where the line between healer and tormentor blurred. Each patient was a mirror reflecting his failures and fears, a testament to the limits of human understanding. The sun set beyond the asylum, casting long shadows that swallowed the garden and cloaked the building in gloom. Inside, Eleanor lay on a cold cot, eyes wide open, staring into the abyss. Madness was no longer a distant threat, but a creeping reality, wrapping its tendrils around her mind. Blackthorn was not just a place, it was a descent, a journey through darkness where the light of hope flickered and faded, lost amid the echoes of forgotten souls. As the cold grip of night swallowed the skies above Blackthorn, the asylum transformed. No longer merely a house of confinement, it became a crucible of suffering where the fragile boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred to indistinction. The flickering gas lamps cast grotesque shadows against peeling wallpaper, distorting the faces of those condemned to wander its halls, ghosts in their own lives. Prisoners, not just of iron and stone, but of minds unraveling beneath relentless torment. Among these spectral figures was Jonathan Mallory, a gaunt man whose sunken eyes betrayed a torment far deeper than any wound of flesh. Once a promising artist, Jonathan's descent into madness began with a single brushstroke, an image that refused to leave his mind, growing until it devoured all others. His paintings became windows into a dark abyss, canvases soaked with despair and dread. The asylum's walls confined his body, but his mind had slipped beyond reach, spiraling into madness so profound that he murmured of conversations with unseen horrors and angels whose wings were stained with blood. Jonathan's story was but one thread in the tangled web of Blackthorn's forgotten souls. Each inmate carried within them a tempest of pain, memories twisted like the iron bars that imprisoned them. There was Margaret Hale, the widow whose grief had shattered her reason, a once vibrant woman now reduced to incessant whispers of lost children, her hands trembling as if clutching phantoms. And Thomas Abernathy, whose silence spoke louder than words, a man whose rage had erupted into violence. Now broken and hollowed by the asylum's relentless regimen, Dr. Ambrose Wren's laboratory lay at the heart of this living nightmare. Here, amid shelves cluttered with jars of strange specimens and anatomical drawings smeared with ink, he pursued his experiments with fevered intensity. Driven by a blend of hope and desperation, he tested radical treatments that teetered on the edge of madness themselves. Electrotherapy jolting fragile brains, leaching blood in the belief it could purge insanities, poison, and the infamous moral treatment, a cold and cruel system of discipline masquerading as kindness. His assistants, often young and terrified, bore witness to the blurred line between healing and harm. In one dimly lit chamber, Jonathan's trembling hand was strapped to a wooden board, electrodes pressed against his temples. As sparks hissed and muscles twitched involuntarily, he screamed, half in agony, half in a plea for release from a torment no medicine could soothe. The air was thick with the metallic scent of fear and despair, mingling with the whispered prayers of patients clutching at sanity's fraying edges. Outside the laboratory, the nurses moved through the corridors like specters themselves, faces pale, eyes hollow from long nights spent witnessing suffering beyond measure. Sister Agatha, a woman hardened by years of watching hope die, carried the weight of countless confessions. She spoke softly to the patients, her voice a fragile thread of comfort. Amid the clamor of madness, yet even her steely resolve cracked beneath the endless tide of screams, the ceaseless parade of broken minds. Among the darkest corners of Blackthorn was the punishment cellar, chamber so cold and suffocating that the very air seemed to conspire against life. Here, inmates who defied the rigid rules of the asylum were cast like sinners into a pit of despair. Eleanor Finch had once been sent there for a moment of rebellion, a whispered curse against the cruelty that had stolen her freedom. The cold seeped into her bones, the silence pressing down until her mind threatened to shatter. When she emerged, days later, she was a shadow of herself, her spirit fractured and fragile. The asylum's architecture itself seemed designed to break the human soul. Narrow corridors twisted like serpents, each turn revealing a new horror. The constant clang of iron doors, the distant howl of those lost to madness, the cold stone walls that drank the warmth of lifefall, converged to create a symphony of despair. Yet, within this despair, the inmates clung desperately to shards of memory, of love, of hope, fragile lifelines in a sea of darkness. Dr. Wren's obsession with control extended beyond medicine to the very minds of his patients. He believed madness was a malleable force, something to be reshaped and subdued. His notebooks overflowed with diagrams illustrating the architecture of thought and madness, attempts to map the chaotic territories within. But each success came at a price, each treatment another step into the abyss. The asylum was a crucible, and the patients its unwilling alloys, forged in suffering. One night, as rain battered the asylum's grim facade, a fire broke out in the east wing. Flames licked hungrily at wooden beams, smoke twisting like specters into the night. Chaos erupted as attendants scrambled to contain the blaze. the screams of terrified inmates mingling with the roar of the fire. Jonathan, trapped in his cell, clawed at the walls, eyes wild with terror as the smoke crept closer. Eleanor, barely conscious, was carried through the choking haze by Sister Agatha, her whispered prayers lost amid the cacophony. The fire revealed the fragile veneer of order that held Blackthorn together. Walls crumbled, secrets spilled into the open, and the thin line between sanity and madness thinned dangerously. When the flames finally died, the asylum was left scarred and smoldering, a testament to the fragile, burning hope that flickered even in the darkest places. And yet, even amidst ruin, the darkness endured. Blackthorn was a place where the human spirit was both imprisoned and tested, where every mind held a story of tragedy and every shadow whispered of dreams crushed beneath the weight of fear. In the cold silence after the fire, the echoes of the loss of Eleanor, Jonathan, and countless others hung like ghosts in the corridors, reminders that in this house of madness, few would escape unscathed. The morning after the fire, the sun struggled to pierce through the dense fog that hung like a shroud over Blackthorn. The ruins smoldered, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of burnt wood and scorched flesh, a stark reminder of the night's horrors. Yet amid the ruin, the asylum's grim routine clung stubbornly to life. As if the very walls refused to surrender the souls imprisoned within. Jonathan Mallory, his body gaunt but eyes aflame with a madness that had deepened into obsession, wandered the charred remains of his once home. His fingers traced the blackened stones, as if trying to draw meaning from the ruin, seeking answers to the questions that gnawed at his mind. Madness, he believed, was not a curse but a key one that unlocked visions of a world unseen by sane men. In his fevered dreams, angels wept tears of blood, and demons danced on the edges of reason. But Jonathan was not alone in his torment. Eleanor Finch, who had survived the suffocating cold of the punishment cell and the fire's fury, now moved through the wreckage with hollow steps. Her spirit had fractured, splintered like glass, shattered by cruelty. She muttered prayers to saints long forgotten, clinging to fragments of faith that flickered weakly in the darkness. Her eyes, once bright with youthful hope, were now pools of despair. Reflecting the torment etched deep within, Dr. Ambrose Wren, too, emerged from the ashes with his resolve unbroken. Though the fire had consumed many of his precious tomes and experiments, his mind was a labyrinth of conflicting impulses, the desire to heal battling with the drive to dominate. He spoke in hushed tones of new treatments, whispers of a radical therapy that might bring salvation or doom. His assistants watched with a mix of awe and dread, aware that Wren's brilliance was shadowed by a dangerous obsession. The surviving patients were gathered in a makeshift ward, the wooden beams creaking overhead as if mourning the lives lost within these walls. Here, the fragile line between sanity and madness grew ever thinner. Voices rose and fell in a cacophony of pain and delirium, shrieks of anguish, whispers of secrets, laughter that held a hint of madness. In this crucible, every soul was tested, every mind laid bare. Margaret Hale, once a widow, broken by grief, now wandered this new prison with a gaze distant and hollow. She clutched a faded photograph, a relic of a life stolen by sorrow, and spoke to it as if it were a living thing. Her whispered lamentations echoed through the ward, a mournful refrain that pierced the hearts of those who heard. Her story was one of loss and the cruel burden of memory, a testament to the human cost of a society that cast aside its vulnerable. Thomas Abernathy, whose rage had once erupted like a violent storm, now sat in silence, his hands trembling as he traced patterns in the dust. His eyes darted nervously, haunted by shadows only he could see. The fire had taken much from him, but it had not quelled the tempest within. His silence was a fortress, guarding a storm of fury and fear that threatened to consume him. Sister Agatha moved through this haunted landscape with a heavy heart. The years had etched lines of sorrow across her face, and her eyes held the weight of countless tragedies witnessed. She tended to the broken with a tenderness born of desperation, her whispered prayers a fragile shield against the darkness. Yet even she could not escape the creeping despair that seeped into every corner of Blackthorn. As days passed, the new regime at the asylum tightened its grip. Dr. Wren's treatments grew more invasive, more unyielding. Electrotherapy sessions stretched longer, bloodletting was performed with grim determination, and the so-called moral treatment became a tool of oppression rather than healing. Patients were stripped of their identities, reduced to mere specimens in a cruel experiment. Jonathan became a focal point of these experiments. His paintings, once vibrant expressions of torment, were now dissected by Wren as clues to the mind's labyrinth. Electrodes were affixed to his temples, and the machine's humming filled the air as jolts of electricity surged through his fragile brain. Jonathan screamed, a sound that tore through the asylum like a banshee's wail, a primal cry that spoke of agony beyond words. Yet, in the depths of his madness, he glimpsed visions, flashes of angels with bloodied wings, of dark realms where the sane dared not tread. Eleanor's rebellion, though subdued, simmered beneath the surface. The fire had scarred her body and soul, but her spirit clung stubbornly to life. In stolen moments, she whispered defiance to the shadows, vowed to remember the names of those lost to Blackthorn's darkness. Her broken prayers were acts of resistance against a world that sought to erase her. In the darkest hours, when the asylum lay silent, but for the rattling chains and the whispered madness, strange phenomena began to manifest. Patients spoke of shadows that moved without source, of whispers carried on cold drafts, of visions that blurred the line between nightmare and reality. Jonathan's fevered mind became a beacon for these apparitions, his art a bridge to the unseen. The walls of Blackthorn seemed to breathe with the anguish of those trapped within. The building itself, a prison not just of flesh but of spirit. The fire had changed Blackthorn, but it had not freed its captives. Instead, it deepened the shadows, sharpened the edges of madness, and forged new chains of suffering. The asylum was a place where hope was a fleeting dream, where the struggle for sanity was a war fought in the silence between screams. And as the nights grew colder, the line between healer and tormentor blurred. The ghosts of Blackthorn whispered that in this house of despair, no one truly escaped. Madness was not just a fate, but a sentence that Jonathan, Eleanor, Margaret, and Thomas were doomed to serve, each trapped in a labyrinth of fear, pain, and fractured dreams from which there was no escape.